Okay, so the last couple of weeks, like Mark shared, our theme has been here at Coast has been about warfare. And, 2 weeks ago, Mark spoke on fasting that we're going to be doing this week. And I'm just so excited because as a church, I feel that coming together and doing this for the next 3 days is just going to be such a significant thing. Last week, Pastor Julie preached on division and isolation. Such a powerful message. If you missed any of these messages, please, please, please listen to them on podcast or watch them on YouTube because they're going to set you up for what God's doing. Okay, and I just felt they were such incredibly powerful messages for us today. So today I'm going to continue the theme of warfare, and the title of my message is Woke. I'm going to read a bit tonight about a man in the Bible named Gideon. So some of you might know a little bit about Gideon. I dug into the Old Testament, so I'll have a little look of what I can find. And we pick up the story of Gideon, and Gideon goes for quite a few chapters in Judges, the book of Judges. So I'm not going to obviously read all of that. But where I'm going to pick up the story is that he worked for his father threshing wheat, which means that they grew wheat and he had to remove the heads of the wheat from the stalks. That's what threshing wheat means. And to give you a bit of a backstory, God's people, the Israelites, had done a lot of evil and they'd forgotten about all the incredible things that God had done before them. And because they turned their hearts away from God, they're actually being invaded by this country and by Midian. And the Midianites were actually coming into Israel and they were taking land, they were destroying their crops and killing their livestock. And when things got really, really bad for the Israelites, they cried out for God to help them. So God sends an angel to this man Gideon, who is working for his dad. And this is where we'll read from. And I'm going to start in Judges 6, verse 12 to 16. So if you're taking notes, write this down. And it says, "When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, 'The Lord is with you, mighty warrior.' 'Pardon me, Lord,' Gideon replied, 'but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of the Midian.' The Lord turned to him and said, 'Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?' 'Pardon me, my Lord,' Gideon replied, 'but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest and I am the least in my family.' The Lord answered, 'I will be with you and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive.' So all of a sudden, this angel appears to Gideon and Gideon's title changes from labourer in the threshing room to warrior. All of a sudden, he's called to not be what he could see, but to be what God could see. And in that moment, it changed like that. Each of us here tonight at some point would really probably struggle with the value on our life based on what we see instead of what God says. Let's have a look at Gideon's reply to God. "Now the Lord has abandoned us," was one of the things he said. So basically, he's saying, my life's going really bad, and we can all relate to this. Where were you, God? Why are you allowing this stuff to happen? His second response was, my family's not very strong. So my family is a bit of a mess. We don't have it all together. And the third excuse that he gave this angel was, I'm the weakest of them all. So in other words, I'm a bit of a failure. I don't have my life sorted. I mess up a bit. God has called each and every one of us to have a mission that is bigger than what we see in ourselves. Our excuses are not part of God's plan. Gideon's excuses were not part of what God just absolutely ignored that. Well, he didn't ignore it. He actually rebutted it with an answer and then kept going. Our excuses are not part of what God wants for us. They weren't part of his purpose for you and I when we were born. And they're not a reason for him to bypass us now. It doesn't matter what it looks like. God's still got a purpose and a plan for you. And he won't bypass you because of your choices. He won't bypass you because of what you did 5 years ago, because of what you did 5 minutes ago. The angel said to Gideon, God is with you, mighty warrior. I just want to say, warrior is a man or a woman who is engaged in warfare. And it's really basically a person who shows great strength and great courage in the face of hard times, which all of us have had the opportunity to do that. And sometimes we are confused that there are hard times, but you know what? That's not the truth. Sometimes we can go, without all of this, without this hard time, I'm failing. I can't, God will never use me. I'm not going to measure up, and it's just a lie. There are hard times, and there are times when we need to have the courage and the trust to walk through them with God. When we are lulled to sleep, and this is what my key is tonight, when we are lulled to sleep by the pressure of everyday responsibilities, we fall asleep to the purpose that God's put on our lives. Gideon questioned the call of God on his life, and he responded with, but it can't happen, God, because of this and this and this. But God said two very powerful things to Gideon when Gideon threw up those excuses. He said, am I not sending you? I will be with you. It's one thing, and I want you to listen to this. It's one thing to come to church on Sunday and spend time listening to great preaching. We've got brilliant communicators and preachers in this church. It's one thing to come on Sunday and listen to that great preaching, to sing some really fantastic praise, to enter into some beautiful worship and catch up with your family, your church family. It's one thing to do that. It's an entirely different thing to live your life all together every single day, understanding that God has a purpose and a plan for you, and all you've got to remember is that He's sent you and He's going to be with you. That is the difference between playing church and being a part of church. That is the difference between religion and relationship. I know today that that's really speaking to somebody. I know today that somebody has struggled with the fact that, God, I go through the motions, but I don't feel like I'm growing. And I want to encourage you today that God does not look at yesterday. He does not look at, and that does not disqualify you from what He's called you to. Maybe you have struggled when pressure comes around your life. Maybe at work. Maybe you've been struggled to, you feel pressured because some of the guys at work are talking dirty and, your workmates are saying really off stuff, and you know that you don't really have the conviction to stay true to what your values are because you feel pressured. Maybe you, as a woman, have invested into conversations with your friends who talk about having an affair or talk about sleeping around, and you start to entertain that thought, and you can't shake the thought of what that would be like. This sort of stuff is what happens in our life when we fall asleep in our relationship with God. The devil comes in with a louder voice, and we're asleep in the purpose, and we're asleep in what God's called of us, because we go through the routines, and the responsibility of our life crowds us, and we lose that, and we fall asleep in our relationship. And then things start to be louder. Ungodly things, unholy things start to speak louder. This is what happens when relationship morphs into religion and we forget to do what we hear. Every week, and I get so challenged by some of the preaching out of this church, every week we have the opportunity to grab hold of a key. We have the opportunity to grab hold of something that we can apply and go, I'm going to make sure that makes a difference in my life. But if you come and you just listen and then you forget to do what you hear, that means we're falling asleep in our relationship. When we become sleepy in our convictions, in our actions, our values and our godly responsibilities suffer. We get stuck threshing the wheat instead of being a warrior. We stay there. We stay there. We don't understand the title that God's given us. And we think, this is my call in life. This is what I'm called to do, and I'm going to keep threshing the wheat, and we don't hear the warrior. Gideon's woke moment led to a massive change in Israel's circumstances. You know, like I said, his story goes over quite a few chapters, but he actually beat up the Midianites, he defeated them, he drove them out of his country. He engaged in warfare that shook him out of apathy and into victory. He stepped out of that threshing floor. He stepped out of working as a labourer. He stepped out of his day-to-day job. He stepped out of his responsibility as a businessman. He stepped out of his responsibility of someone that goes to work as a teacher or a labourer or whatever it is. And he said, God, there's more. You've called me to be more. And let's continue reading from Judges 8. And this is sort of like the sad part of the story. And it says in Judges 8 and verse 28, Midian, the country that had, kept attacking, was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land had peace for 40 years. Sad bit, verse 33. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals or the gods. They set up Baal-berith as their god, and they did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. In this story that I just read, God was present for just one generation. One generation. He did this incredible thing. There was peace for 40 years. The Israelites lived their best life for 40 years. But the moment that man died, they went straight back. Gideon embraced his title change from labourer to warrior and walked in that. So what went wrong? How do we prevent this from happening in our family? How do we prevent this from happening in our church? How do we prevent the gospel of Jesus ending with us? When you read all the story of Gideon, even though he stepped into the role of this incredible warrior, he was basically a one-man show. It all fell onto him. He did this and he did that, and he was the hero. But when we make life all about us and our current job or our current relationship or our current circumstance, we don't reproduce God in other people's lives. What we do is we live for ourselves. And we go, I'm doing the Monday to Friday, the 9 to 5. And then I'm busy with family, and then I'm busy with this, and then I'm busy with that. And that's great. And all of us are busy. I have 6 children. I have raised 6 children. I know what busyness looks like. But if that takes the place of the call of God on my life, if that takes the place, if I live under the farmer, the labourer title, and I don't live under the warrior title, then I've wasted my time here on earth. I've wasted it and I've missed what God's called me to. And you know what? And like Gideon, if we don't reproduce ourselves, we run the risk of it all stopping with us. We're not here. Mark and I had this incredible revelation about 10 years ago that this church is not here for Mark and I. This church is here for the generations that are coming. And there will come a time when we will graciously step aside and we will watch these generations that have been sown and planted and harvest rise up. And that is how we need to look at life. Despite what you do, you don't have to be a pastor to look at life like that. How are you leading your family? Are you teaching them that growing deeper in God is an option, not a lifestyle? That developing healthy habits of church attendance and serving God is incredibly important in their life, or that attending church on Sundays comes second or third place to work, sport, TV shows, or moods. Wow. What we do is what we reproduce, no matter how holy we try to sound. You can sprout off the Bible, you can quote scriptures, you can do whatever, you can preach, you can pray for people, you can pray for your family, but what you do is what you'll reproduce. If you're living immorally, then you're going to breed immorality. No matter what you say, no matter how you package it, if you're living immorally, you're going to breed immorality. If you put work or your mood or TV first, you are teaching that it's acceptable to put other things first before God. We've got to be so careful what we do with our life. If you're treating your parents horribly, kids here, youth here, then you're closing the door to God working in hearts through you. When it comes to the things of God, are we awake or asleep? Do we lead by example? Do we pray by example? Do we speak by example? That is probably my biggest challenge. Do we do honourable or holy things by example, or is our life really a joke and a hypocritical, mess? Do your family, your friends, your teachers, your colleagues, your parents, or your workmates know you by your strong morals and convictions, or are you just one of the boys or one of the girls? The greatest tragedy we can do with our lives is to allow our own selfishness and our own sleepiness today destroy a generation for God tomorrow. We have got to wake up. We have got to have a relationship with God that is fully awake. We will fall asleep at the wheel and we will crash and end the line of God's kingdom in our life. Nobody in their right mind wants that to happen, yet I see it happen over and over again, where people stop the line of God in their hearts and in their lives because they fell asleep at the wheel. And they go, you know what, I'm too consumed in myself and what's happening in my life, and it's all about me. I've gone through so much heartbreak with families that, the wife spits it or the husband spits it, and they reef out their teenage kids and they reef out whatever. And then I look, 5 years, 10 years down the track, and the kids are scattered everywhere. None of them are following God. None of them are honouring God with their life. And I'm like, really? This has got to be beyond you. You've got to not fall asleep in the call of God and in the title of God on your life. Thanks, Mum. Love my mum. So, just like Gideon, what God was doing now finished with him. We don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. I'm just a stepping stone in part of God's plan. This church is not all about just me. And the moment that Mark and I go, we're getting a little bit older on in life. And yes, I turned 51 this week. Thank you for So, give us another few years and we'll be wanting to retire with our 100 grandchildren. And because I'm counting on it. But you know what? If we set up this church just like Gideon, then there's nothing. It rises and falls with us. And that's not our heart. And that shouldn't be your heart for your family either. That shouldn't be your heart for this church family. It shouldn't be your heart for your own family. You should be doing everything in your power to stay awake at the wheel. To say, God, I need you to show me what my title is. And God, I need you to hold me accountable for how I live my life, for my children, for my family, for my workmates, for my colleagues. If we can't learn to look past our earthly titles and lean into our spiritual titles, then we run the risk of no generation following behind us remembering God. So Mark and I would have basically played church for 30 years. I don't want that. I know most people sitting here don't want that. You know what? We need to look past the titles of dad, mum, student, teacher, pastor, musician, labourer, business owner, and wake up to the responsibility of the call of God on us. We need to wake up to the responsibility of the call of God on us. We need to understand warfare in our lives. All around us, people and things are vying for our attention, for our finances, for our physical and our mental health. Immorality, alcoholism, financial pressure, drug abuse, anxiety, greed, pornography, gambling, anger, hurt, apathy, work pressure are all breathing down our necks to put us to sleep in our godly purpose. War, whatever that looks like for you, whatever it looks like for you, is the constant fight for your attention and the constant pushing against you to take you out and put you to sleep. The enemy says, if I can distract you so that you are so invested in yourself and so invested in your job and so invested in everything that's not really godly, then you're not leaning into the title that God's given for you. And you're skipping your purpose and you're moving away from your purpose, and the generation's going to die after you. We're in a fight for our families. We are in a battle and a war. And if you fall asleep, let me just stop you right there, because if you fall asleep, the battle still rages. It's time to wake up and go, you know what? I've got to fight for my family. I have to fight for my family. Not fight, they're being picked on at school. I'm talking spirituality. We have got to fight for our children's spiritual lives. We've got to fight for our work colleagues and our parents and everybody that we do life with. God's called us and mandated us for that. This week we have the opportunity to come together and shake ourselves awake with this fast. This is an opportunity. This is not just it's all about depriving myself. No, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to go, you know what, God, I'm going to stand up for what I need shaken in my life. I need you to awake me in stuff that in my life that I've fallen asleep to. We have got that incredible opportunity. The opportunity to fight for your family, for your circumstances, for you and your family's future. We are so ripped off when we get lulled to sleep and we forget. Gideon is a brilliant example of accepting God into his life and acknowledging his title change. Just like we did when we walked from death to life, when we walked from being sinner to saved. Gideon had to walk away from his excuses and realize that God was waking him up. What do you have to leave behind tonight? What do you have to leave? What excuse do you need to leave behind tonight to be awake in God? You know, moving from self-imposed titles to God's titles means that we have a woke moment. To you, that might mean moving from rejection to acceptance. It might mean moving from lies to truth, from addiction to freedom, from hate to love, from unforgiveness to forgiveness. That is a beauty in the church. From apathy to activeness, from mediocre to leader, from hypocrite to example, and from sin to holiness. And as the band comes up, I want to read one last part of the Bible as I finish up tonight. And I love reading out the Message Bible, and just as I was prepping this preach the last couple of days, God just showed me this in Proverbs, and I just love it. I love the way that the Message talks about the Bible. And anyway, it says this in Proverbs 24, verse 30 to 34. And it says, "One day I walked by the field of an old lazybones, and then past the vineyard of a lout. They were overgrown with weeds, thick with thistles, all the fences broken down. I took a long look and pondered what I saw. The fields preached me a sermon, and I listened. A nap here, a nap there. A day off here, a day off there. Sit back, take it easy. Do you know what comes next? Just this. You can look forward to a dirt poor life with poverty as your permanent house guest." You know what? That Bible verse just summed it all up. When we fall asleep, it's just a little nap. Just drop my guard here. I've just let my child do that just this once, twice, 3 times. I haven't reined in that thought that I had that I know is not right. I just keep revisiting it. Just a little nap. A little nap here, a little nap there led to thistles and weeds and broken down fences. When we fall asleep spiritually, when we allow our lives to be overcome with the weeds of sin, when we allow our family to become thick with thistles of apathy and excuses, when we allow compromise to break down the fences of value in our lives, then we become spiritually poor. This week as we fast, we are actually waking up and we're saying, God, I'm listening to what you're going to say in my life, and I'm warfaring for myself and my family. I truly, truly believe that this is going to be a massive turning point for many people's lives. I just want to invite you to stand right now. We're going to go into a time of worship. But let me encourage you with this. Let me finish with this. Don't fall asleep. Don't overlook what God's called you to do. Don't overlook what God's called your responsibility to be. You know, maybe your children are all grown up. It doesn't matter. Whoever you contact with in your life from week to week, whoever is in your world, that's your responsibility. And I want to encourage you this week, if you hadn't thought about fasting with us, think about it. Like Mark said, you don't need to fast food. It just might be something that takes your attention away from what God is asking of you. You know, it might be television over night time. It might be social media. Whatever it looks like, maybe it's fasting meals the whole time. Whatever that looks like, lay that thing down and say, God, wake me up. Wake me up to what you need me to hear. Wake me up to warfaring in my life and not just rolling over and letting my fences get broken down, but God, rising up and doing and being all that you've called me to be, the title that you've given me. Thanks, guys.